Welcome to the Silver Creek Insights podcast. I'm your host, Felisa Wiley. Today, I'm joined by Isaac Strain, Director of Engineering, scientist, and systems thinker, whose path defines convention, from experiencing homelessness in high school to contributing to SpaceX's Crew Dragon program, leading pharma manufacturing teams, and working as a consultant at Boston Consulting Group. Isaac, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great to be here, Fee. You got a great podcast, and I'm happy to be a guest on it. Um,
We're happy to have you.
little bit about myself. So I like to start with before engineering because I want people to understand that engineering, a lot of people dislike it, including people who are in engineering, and that's okay. Okay. So I started out interested in music performance and acting, probably the least related to engineering as possible. Due to circumstances in my life, economic hardship, living on my own at 17, I actually had dropped out of school to work in a factory, and I was convinced to come back to high school to finish out with the option of, hey, if you do a good job, there's a chance you can go to university and you can change your life. That was the moment that I started Googling what's the highest paying jobs outside of a 4-year degree, and engineering was at the top of the list. So I went to university for chemical engineering, almost dropped out my first year after failing. But one of the things I've learned is failure is just another opportunity to get up and try again. Made it through university, spent some time in oil and gas. I had joined oil and gas with the goal of transforming the energy industry for the better, and realized that that was going to be about a 35-year commitment if I was to get to the position required to do that. And I didn't want to wait that long. So one of my colleagues who I'd worked with at Exxon had started working at SpaceX, asked if I might be interested. I mean, come on, who wouldn't be interested in rockets? So I studied for 3 weeks, many all-nighters, interviewed many people who were already had worked with aerospace systems and whatnot. And basically, I found a way into SpaceX. I worked there for what felt like an eternity, but was really just around a year before I decided to take a management consulting path, worked at BCG. Then I spent some time trying to start my own agricultural technology business. We can talk about that later if you want. Then COVID hit, and COVID changed everything for everyone. And I thought, what's the best way to capitalize career-wise at this time? Well, we need vaccines. Let's go make vaccines. And I'm good at making things. So joined a pharmaceutical CDMO. If you got a vaccine, likely you got it made from the facility that I worked in, right? After pharma, I got an opportunity to work in medical devices. And now I'm at the point where my engineering bingo card is almost completely full, right? I'm missing maybe a couple more semiconductors and nuclear. Um, but at the end of the day, it's problem solving, and I love problem solving. So,
You have done a lot. And what sounds interesting is that one, you have to be smart to do what you're doing. You even though you want to do music and acting, never saying that you weren't smart, but you always knew like what your goal was, like maximizing your impact in the least amount of time and making the most amount of money. And what's so
exactly.
funny as you talked about like, oh, I wanted to make a change in how like the oil industry, and you're like, I don't have 35 years for that, so let's cut that in half and see what I can do now. So
Yep.
you knew to jump ship when an idea wasn't or a path wasn't for you, but you also pivoted to something that was like fascinating and interesting. So it sounds like you're also you probably value like lifelong learning and challenges.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people mistaken their career journey as the only journey in lifelong learning. To be honest, it is the biggest contributor because you're spending most of your time solving challenges there. But no, lifelong learning, not just in career, but outside of that. And if you're not, especially today with how fast technology is advancing, there's I organize learning in two buckets. Okay, there's have you ever played video games?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. You're familiar with the skill tree, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So traditional education is built around um, expanding your skill tree, right? There's prerequisites that once you've done those, it unlocks new skills.
Yes.
That is actually just really one half of the equation. The other half over here is your rate of learning. That's the rate at which you can expand down the skill tree. So I have put much more of my efforts into the rate of learning versus the actual things I can check off on my skill tree. And in the beginning, it's an upfront investment because it looks like you're progressing less, but then you start to build momentum. It's like compound interest, right? Invest a lot early, have bigger gains later. So that's kind of my thinking regarding development.
Where did you learn that?
Playing video games. I mean, honestly, so one of the things I was, one of the things you'll learn about me is even before I did consulting, frameworks were my jam.
Mm,
I'm not a fan of a specific framework. I'm just a fan of having it because it's just like in engineering. If you give yourself boundary conditions, it actually gives yourself more freedom. If someone came to you and said, "Hey, I want an app," and that was all they said, oh my gosh, that's so hard to, you don't, even though it has no boundary conditions, it actually gives you less freedom than before because
mhm.
you're inundated with opportunity and there's no direction.
Yeah.
So the boundary conditions are important.
What were your boundary conditions when it comes to your career? I think you mentioned you loved like the challenges, you loved the learning. You also wanted to maximize like how quickly you went down that skill tree. But was there anything else that drew you to what you've done?
Yes. Yes. So I know enough about myself to know that I like everything or what feels like everything. If you said just follow what your heart desires, I need 1,000 lifetimes to do it. I don't have that. I don't have 1,000 lifetimes. One of the things I look at whenever I'm faced with a decision is choose the path that has the most forks in the road later down the path. So for instance, why did I choose chemical engineering? Well, it pays a lot. Okay, that's one part of it, right? But there's actually a degree that pays more than that typically, and that's petroleum engineering. I didn't do petroleum engineering because the number of doors I can walk through once I've gone down that path, it's very, very limited. Whereas in chemical engineering, you have people who do chemical engineering and they do oil and gas, they do chemical manufacturing, they do pharmaceuticals, they'll do med devices. They might go to law school, they might go to vet school, they might go to, there's so many different paths. So whenever you're faced with the choice, if you know you're somebody who has more interests than you can handle, just choose the path that's going to have the most optionality later down the road.
Well, that's such great advice. And similarly, so I'm going to grad school in the fall, and I'm want to get like a dual master's degree, but
Oh,
I'm trying to figure
why are
out
you
like
doing that to yourself, Fee?
I don't want to work anymore. That's
Fair.
why else do people go to grad school? They don't.
Yeah, yeah.
I've had such like a crazy career experience where what I'm self-taught when it comes
Mhm.
to data and software engineering. So facing like those facing up against those like computer science degrees, being like overshadowed over it's like all that stuff has led me in this direction basically. But right now in trying to figure out well, like what program do I want to do? After I do my first one,
Mhm.
I'm thinking similarly to you, I just didn't really realize it was an actual, like, framework. I was just like, I just didn't wanna pigeonhole myself
Yeah.
in a bucket. So it's
Mhm.
actually real that's your advice is applicable, like, in your career, in grad school, and kind of in everything that you do.
Well, but there are people who I've met who suffer from decision fatigue
Yeah.
a lot more than others who get overwhelmed by options. For those people, that advice would be terrible because it would
Mm,
mean every door they come in front of, if it's stressful to have to decide whether or not which path they're going to take, then that's not for them. But for maybe people like you and I who maybe get see a butterfly, oh, I want to go this way, and oh, there's a shining object over here, those are that's been great for me in life.
and then also following your intuition, like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So you could have been, like, chemical, like, engineering and being like, "It's so many opportunities, but, like, gosh, that's gonna be awful." I don't know, you could have looked at it. It had to be, like you probably had that internal motivation as well.
No, I didn't
No!
actually. No, no, no. So that's the thing. I made a decision. I made a
Okay.
decision, and so there's certain decisions I have that are called like non-negotiables, right? Where where Isaac of today makes a commitment that the Isaacs of tomorrow up until a certain point can't go back on. I told myself I'm going to get a degree in chemical engineering, whether I like it or not. And then
Okay.
after that, if I decide I want to do nothing related to it, fine. And it's a good thing I did that because, like I said, my first semester, my very first math class, it was an engineering calc 2. I failed. I was doing terrible. And I called my dad. This is somebody who, I love my dad, but we have our differences. And when I called him, I said, "Hey, I failed. I'm not sure what to do here." And he said, "Well, you're probably not cut out for it. You should just drop out." And that made me so angry that I decided, you know what? I hung up. And from that moment on, it was never again. I'm just going to get this degree no matter what. So,
I actually love that. It was like that might have been, like, the fire, like, lit underneath you to be like, "You're gonna do this. You're gonna prove your dad wrong."
yeah, well, not even just him, but I think
Yeah.
like, and this is the part of why I gave a little bit of my high school background is right. You know, people look at me today and where I'm at, and I had a conversation with an employee at work who said, how did you get to where you're at today so quickly? In their mind, they figured I'd come from a well-to-do parents who were engineers. They have this image in their mind of where I came from. My senior year of high school, I was voted most likely to go to prison. I mean, I was not, and not because I was a bad guy, but I was disruptive.
Yeah.
High school wasn't. I definitely wasn't the same student in high school that I was in university. Um, but I think sometimes I perform better when people don't believe in me. I feel like an edge case.
So this So it sounds also like there's had to be some slight like reinvention of yourself. Like one, of course you're not the same person who you were like in high school to like college. Like every single year in my eyes, like if you're not growing and changing and a completely different person, you're not doing something right. So you've had a lot of like quote unquote reinventions. What's something that you had to unlearn along the way that helped you grow? No, it's true. It's like you're taking what you know, you're finally saying to yourself, I am a leader. I've gotten myself this far, even though you had advice. And now you're at a place where you're like, oh, I can take it from here. And of course, but you're also recognizing that there's so much that you don't know. Yeah, that's okay, but it sounds like you're more aligned in the path that you're on and you have more confidence in yourself.
I'm sure you've had guests say this before, because I'm pretty sure I've heard guests say this before, but it's that as an engineering leader, your technical skills start to matter less and less and less the higher up you go. That doesn't mean technical literacy. That's a different thing, right? Because you can be
Right.
able to jump into an application and learn it and understand its use cases and its limitations. That's different. That's the literacy. But in terms of the years of experience of dealing with the troubleshooting, the specific issues, that becomes way less important. And if you have it, some people will say, oh, if I have that though, that should be a plus. It should be something that is like a bonus. It actually is going to set you back because I've watched as leaders who know enough about, they might know exactly the job that you're doing because they did it 20 years ago, right? But they haven't been doing it in the last however many years. So they're dangerous enough to know all the possible solutions and all the possible problems that they saw in their past, but they're so far removed from the problem of today that they're trying to apply a set of solutions to a problem they don't really understand. So you almost want, as you get higher, to have your engineering leaders be less in the weeds. They need to understand how to get into them if they have to. But if you're getting into them, that's because somebody you trust is no longer with the organization or someone on your team hasn't been developed enough, at which point you've already failed as a leader.
Interesting. And I'm curious, it makes sense because once you gain a certain level of business experience and business knowledge, the engineering leadership, like you're supposed to cater to that and then whittle down what the North Star metrics are for the entire
Hmm.
company, like see how your team can contribute to that. So that makes sense. But I'm curious with the introduction and expansion of AI kind of started taking over a lot of like entry level, like junior engineering roles. What does that mean for leadership? And in the context of um, growing the teams um, and nurturing talent.
Yeah, so I mean, the first is my organization originally had some hesitancy around AI usage. I told my team, use everything and anything that we can at this point. Unfortunately, if you wait to learn until you feel safe and secure with everything, you're going to be so far behind that who cares if your data is secure if nobody's paying to use any of the insights from it? That's kind of my take.
Mhm.
So the first is to let them loose on the tools that everybody else, all the competitors are going to get into eventually. The second is I think you're gonna have specific experiences that people have had within their career matter a lot more. So I think for a long time the old way of working was how many years have you worked and what kind of problems have you solved? Okay. And then we started to realize that at the rate the world is changing, that matters less than somebody who can learn quickly, who has a novel approach to problem solving. Well, now we've kind of commoditized at least the basic level of problem solving through generative AI. So now I think you are going to have a bit of a regression back to, okay, what specific problems have you not only seen and you can tell me how to deal with, but I want proof that you've dealt with it. So resumes are going to be, they're going to be gone in the future. You're going to move more toward like me sitting down with you, opening my computer and showing the projects that I've completed. with the Slack messages, with all the dirty stuff. I mean, that's what people are going to care about, is seeing that whole picture, knowing that you not only can identify a problem and you can tell me in fancy words how to solve it, but that you've gone through it. And here's the receipts to show it.
Interesting. And you're on the ground right now. What are some emerging trends in engineering that aren't getting enough attention?
Hmm. I think the manufacture, where AI, I guess the interface between AI, software, and the physical world. Okay. We can, just because you have a system that can tell you pretty quickly how you might build a chemical plant for, or a manufacturing plant of some sort. If I ask ChatGPT or Claude or whoever, whichever application, see, I'm already anthropomorphizing, right? Um, Even though I can ask, how would you build this type of manufacturing plant? And within 30 seconds, it's going to give me an answer that's just as good, if not better, than a team of analysts at a management consulting firm with access to great data and partners. It will give me all of that. Um, but now I have to actually make it happen. And I think one of the places that we're sleeping on is though are the thinking part of this man-made machine that is the planet we live on today, or the mechanized planet we live on. Though the brain has advanced, the hands and the rest of the appendages have not. So you can
Mhm.
have a super genius who could, in theory, build anything you want, but if their hands don't work, you're not going to be able to make it into reality. So now we've eliminated the bottleneck on the mind. We are going to see a bottleneck very soon on the material piece of this, which is why robotics, I think, is going to be it's going to be the next place where all the focus has to go, because translating human cognition doesn't matter if we can't actually do something with it.
You're not the first person to tell me to look at robotics moving forward, but I actually want to take a couple of steps
Yeah.
back because we briefly talked about your journey
Hmm.
and how you got an opportunity to work on SpaceX's Crew
Hmm.
Dragon. How did the stakes of that work change your standards for teamwork and engineering?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, in oil and gas, you actually have the way larger risk exposure, because at a refinery or an offshore platform, something that goes wrong there is going to kill dozens of people potentially. A problem with a launch, though far more spectacular in our memory, like the Challenger spacecraft that fell apart in space quite a long before you and I were alive. Um, though that is etched into everyone's memory, that's a crew. That's one crew. So in theory, I was managing less risk than I was managing in oil and gas, but that risk felt so much more intimate. And I'll tell you a little story as to why. So the way SpaceX ran when I was there was kind of in an in-between state. So for the decade leading up to that point, SpaceX had been all in HTO1 was the building, one big warehouse, small group of people with Elon essentially doing most of the development. Then by the time I joined, we were transitioning from a purely development company to a manufacturing. Right now, we're manufacturing multiple Falcon 9 rockets. We're manufacturing satellites, or sorry, we're manufacturing ships to carry satellites. We're manufacturing spacecraft to take astronauts to the space station. We're starting to move out of the pure R&D into the mass manufacturing. So I was right in that middle space. I'd say when Starship became the main focus, which is it was happening when I was there, but it didn't really get rolling till like a year or two after. That's the point at which SpaceX fully transitioned to what I'd call more similar like an OEM for auto manufacturing, right? They have the designs, they know what to do. They do some R&D, but most of what they do now is manufacturing. So I joined at that time. So at least while I was there, you still knew most everybody. It was only a few thousand people on campus. Elon read every resume for every engineer he hired. You had to write a letter to him that he would sign off on to basically brag why I should be here. And he had a rule, which may still be in place today, that if you're in a meeting and you don't think it's important, just leave. So, yeah, it's great. So, we had the astronauts coming to visit to talk about the Crew Dragon missions. There's a big town hall about it. I wasn't there because I felt it's useless for me. I don't feel like going. So, I wasn't there. Well, it got started late because the astronauts showed up late, and I was the only person not in the town hall. So I ran into them and I ended up walking them to the town hall. And of course, while I'm walking with them, I'm asking them questions. And Mike, one of the astronauts, he actually is an alumni from University of Illinois. Him and I got to talking. He works out, super smart, was in the Air Force. I mean, these guys are like rock stars in terms of being in engineering. You look at these guys and that's like the dream job, right? He pulled me aside because I said, I'm build reliability for Dragon propulsion systems. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, can you guarantee that my life is going to be safe on this ship? And he said, I want to show you something. He pulled out his phone. He showed me pictures of his daughters, right? His kids.
Oh
And he
my
said,
gosh.
that's who you're going to have to explain something to if things don't work out. So can I trust you that this spacecraft is ready and it's safe for me to fly in? And of course, I said, yes, of course, it's safe. But in my mind, I'm now thinking every issue ticket that I've signed off on, every design review I've done, I'm thinking, well, I should go take a second look at that, you know? I think it's never the number of lives, it's how close you are to the human aspect of the risk you're undertaking. And meeting Mike in person and having that conversation changed every interaction I had with our systems because now I could not get that memory out of my mind. I didn't sleep well for weeks because you feel responsible for human life beyond those around you. You know that it's going to have an impact. And I even think about the people who, if something happened, God forbid, who are watching live and how that impacts them and their dreams. So it changed my appetite for risk, I'll say. It made me a lot less uh, excited and a bit more cautious about advancing through engineering.
Wow. So I could see how something like a comment in a conversation like that would definitely shake you a little bit to lose sleep and have you rethinking every bit of code that you approved. But I think it's also important to note where when you're working as an engineer, you're working. You're doing something that you're fun. You're solving bits and pieces of the puzzle, but it's not every day that you kind of sort of know exactly what you're working for. So I guess in this case, it was like you knew what you were working on, but now seeing the person on the other side who will be interacting with your work in a slightly different way makes it more real.
Yeah.
And it makes it more like impactful where it's like, ah, shoot, like if I mess up this person's life is kind of in my hand. It's not solely your
No, it's a
responsibility because
shared
there's also
responsibility.
but it's a shared responsibility, and it definitely humanizes the scenario. And what I think is also really amazing with what not amazing in regards of like the learning the lessons that you had to learn from this is that it probably impacted any sort of interaction with emerging technology moving forward.
That's how
Yeah.
I feel. I have so many, like, I use AI all the time. I'm trying to use it as much as I can and keep up. But I still, in the back of my mind, know where this probably will lead. And that that concerns me. But I, me as an individual, I can either decide to not participate in this project and have no influence over it, or I can get on the ship and at least hope that once I'm in it, I can steer it a little bit in one way or the other. We're on a river. You can't change the direction of the river, but you can change how you position yourself within it. And I figured
Yeah.
better to be in the river than to just be on the banks and watch everybody else take it wherever it goes.
And at least now you have potentially some
Yeah.
influence in where the boat that you're
Yes, goes
on
within the river.
along the
Yeah.
river. But you mentioned that you have an idea of where it's headed. Where do you see AI heading?
I think I want to say race to the bottom because that's not the right metaphor. I think it's a race to mediocrity. You will see in the create because you know a bit about how large language models work. It's looking for the most generally accepted answer, which often is a better answer than most answers. It's better than where we've been before. But now you're going to miss out on the more out there ideas that might be the most groundbreaking if everybody over relies on it. I understand that people don't operate in a vacuum, but the more I use it, the more I am quickly placating to an average idea or above average idea. And what made us great is not a bunch of above average ideas. It's moments where you have these great ideas that supercharge advancement and get people excited. Incremental improvement, though important, it doesn't drive excitement. And excitement is core for people wanting to pursue things like engineering, which is essentially solving problems that no one else feels like solving, right? And I worry that 20 to 40 to 60, whoever knows how many years from now, could be in 6 months, people will start to feel as though everything is kind of bland and generic and obvious. Because eventually, when we get past that hardware hurdle, right, you have Neuralink going or
Mhm.
something, and even words aren't going to be a limiting factor. I don't know how exciting life will be. And I think life should be exciting and interesting.
So it's interesting that you brought that up because, and correct me if I'm wrong, as soon as you started talking, my mind went to the Tower of, I think it's called Babel. Babel. Are you
Tower
familiar
Babel,
with that story?
yes.
Babel. And how, so for those tuning in and listening, Tower of Babel?
Babel. I
Babel,
think
okay.
so. That's how I've always pronounced it. I've read the story though,
Okay,
yes.
I'm gonna pronounce it Babel. It's basically about it explains why there's so many different languages in the world, and it suggests that all languages originally stem from one language. When I think of AI in the future, I see it as us returning to a singular language.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. But that
But
singular language, though, has issues because remember, in the Philippines, they have 7 words for grass. Okay. We have maybe 1 word. What that specificity, what is important, I think, for it's region specific or niche specific, whatever you call it. If we all go to one language, I think for the majority of people it will be better, but then you'll have these niches that suffer. And I think the niches is what makes life exciting.
that is exactly what makes life exciting. And you're absolutely correct. Like for instance, I think Greeks, you talked about your grandfather, they have like what 7 to 9 words that describe what love is. English, there's just one, and we're kind of but if you've noticed more in the business world, English is becoming the primary
Hmm.
language. So we are actually losing a lot of native languages because English has taken over. So yes, we're going to lose those the beautiful. And I also think Japanese is a beautiful language.
Hmm.
Like there's so many Japanese words that describe like feelings that we can't describe in like English. So it does make life more exciting, but we're kind of already heading there with English. So I'm curious how AI is going to either expedite that or, yeah, I guess just expedite that.
I'll say this though. It's not like one is good, one is bad, right? There's 2 ends of a spectrum and you're going to bounce between the sides of it. So I think the benefit of having a common language is it removes the barrier for people to understand one another. The world
Mhm.
clearly needed that because for thousands of years, the lack of understanding between each other is what led to numerous deaths and conflict. Great. We're hopefully, other than recent news, right? We are moving more away from that as we all share in our collective commonality as humans. And that's awesome. We haven't seen what the other side looks like yet. So who knows how scary that side is? Maybe it's not as bad, but it's something to be thoughtful of that we have to navigate where we're going to be between these 2 ends. Because yes, commonality is great, great that we can understand each other. But if it's at the expense of you losing part of who you are and part of how you see the world, then the world becomes duller. So I don't know where the sweet spot is, but we'll figure it out.
It's and I feel like this could be a conversation that we have maybe in like 6 months after some reflecting. I've always been like, because this conversation can take us in a whole different
Hmm.
direction where we could talk about um like social media trends, how quickly trends are turning, how like the standards for beauty are kind of sort of becoming commoditized,
Yeah.
and there's like a universal standard as opposed to like how things
Niches.
were.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's gonna be who know like you said, who knows? But it's always interesting to kind of sort of zoom out and take a more I guess like a zoomed out approach as to all of like the moving bits of pieces
Yeah.
involved. But I do want to get back to some of the work that you've
Yes,
done.
of course.
And so you've led digitization efforts in pharma,
Hmm.
including the implementation of SPC and productivity analytics. Where do you think manufacturing orgs still get stuck nowadays?
That's a great question. So, like you, actually, when it comes to data science, data engineering, self-taught. I took when I had my agribusiness and COVID hit and things weren't looking great, I picked up a second job doing data science on the side for a company, um, which was awesome, awesome to see that side of engineering. Where manufacturing still struggles is one on some of the basic access to real-time data. Okay.
Mm,
Um, Something that seems obvious to you, which is like, okay, We're going to connect to our SQL server. Like I'm going to have my data that refreshes every 60 seconds, my data that refreshes once, an hour, once a day. You have your different data sets that run on different ETLs. That is a huge hurdle for manufacturing. A lot they're behind on a lot of this stuff. So first is
Mm,
digitizing in terms of let's collect data, let's get it in front of you. Okay. A lot of companies have gotten that far, but now they're dumb about which data they need to see and how often. Because if you let me determine how often I want to see the data and which data I want to see, I'm going to say I want to see all the data all the time, refreshed instantaneously. And that's not productive, both from the infrastructure side. Let's pretend you have unlimited amount of infrastructure support to allow you to do that. But from a decision making side, that's not really that useful to you. Um, if I have a, you've made executive dashboards, I'm sure.
mhm.
A big part of doing that is highlighting which metrics are most important, make these big on the screen, bright colors,
Yeah,
bold font, versus which things are what I'll call tier two or tier three metrics that if I need more detail around this big one, I might want to click into it and then have a drop down of some detailed metrics that I can dive into if need be. But if I'm constantly looking at all of it, I get overwhelmed. So that's the first piece, right? They don't they didn't have data for a long time. Now they have it. Now they're getting these connections, which they struggle to make, but they're still figuring out how to best utilize the data. And then there's a messier part of this, which is that data is tied to a physical thing often. It's tied to a computer mouse, a mug, whatever widget you're making. And those widgets all are serialized and they're spread out all over your manufacturing facility. You can't find them all the time. It's a bit messier when you're not just dealing with the data in a database. You're actually having to tie it to a real object in real life.
for sure. And like there's some moments where real-time data is actually important. Like I would say, so I actually there's two other episodes on the Silver Creek Inside podcast regarding real-time data.
Yeah.
So I was trying, so sorry, got a shameless plug in for
Yeah,
those
no, they're
two.
great.
No, but like for instance, for credit card fraud, they need real-time
Hmm.
transaction data. However, on like an app like Pocket Money, where I have all of like my finances, that could just be refreshed whenever I check it. That
Or
doesn't need
credit
to be like
score, right?
or credit
Yeah.
score. Yeah, that is like what once a month after all of your payments have been
Hmm.
in. So real time is helpful, but like knowing exactly when it's most beneficial is so much more impactful.
Hmm.
Also, there's kind of like operational cost um that is that goes with like having real-time data and all those refreshes.
Hmm.
So there's so many ways that businesses can look at it. And for so you're saying for manufacturing, they don't need it.
No, no, that's not what I'm
No,
saying. They don't always need
they
real time. Is
don't always
yes.
need it.
So
Okay.
so that's a big piece of it is there's just like you talked about, certain metrics I can wait to see once a day.
Yes.
Others I do need real time. There's another complicating part to this that I think folks who aren't on the hardware side don't often see is computers. We use programmable logic controllers, a PLC. That's basically our way of interfacing with a piece of physical hardware. Okay. Now that I can easily tie into my PLC, I can pull machine data that I otherwise wouldn't have regular access to. So let me give you an example. If I have a CNC controlled mill, just think of something that's moving around, cutting things out. Okay. I can get data on the pressure that I'm feeling
Mm,
on that, right? I can get the location that it's traveling on at any given point. I can see where in the program, what line of code it's currently running. I can see a lot of things that I didn't used to have regular access to. That if I wanted to access before, I'd have to plug in my computer, pull up, watch the program run, and look at these variables in real time. Now I have it from my computer here. And so what people are trying to do is they're trying to build systems around this. Hey, monitor all of the tool pressure across the shop and give me an indication when one of them goes higher than it should be. Give me an alert,
mm,
send a text or an email so that I can have somebody go out into the floor and deal with that. These are all great things, but the problem we're having now is we have all this data, we have all this information, all these good ideas. Not all good ideas are created equal. You can no longer get away as an engineer of having good ideas and solving. As an engineer, you used to be able to be a good engineer. If you could find problems, solve those problems. That's not enough anymore. Now you have to sift through your set of problems all of which there are solutions for that are probably well documented. You can find if you just look on the internet. You have to decide which one makes the most sense to tackle right now for the most value that you're going to get in this moment. So in finances, they'll do something called you've heard of the net present value calculation, right? It's basically saying, there's value that I'm going to get from this, but what is it worth to me right now? Now, in engineering, you have to look at what I would call relative net present value. Everything that you can do is going to be a benefit. It's going to solve a problem. It's going to increase throughput, quality, whatever. You have to do a better job on the front end knowing which one is going to provide you the most relative net present value and tackle that. And oftentimes you don't know until you start getting involved. So that's where a little bit of that intuition comes into play.
Okay, that's interesting. And as you were describing this, by the way, thank you for clarifying. But as you were talking about this, and you mentioned knowing the location, getting alerted when there's issues, it kind of reminded me of my 3D
Yeah,
printer.
it's exactly like that, right? But sometimes
Yeah, like
you getting more information from that 3D printer, did it actually change that much about your ability to 3D print things? That's a genuine
it's
question.
yes, for troubleshooting, it definitely helped when it came to like troubleshooting. But as for the overall printing,
Probably
no.
not.
It was the error thing.
And if you had 100 of those, there's a chance you could get distracted troubleshooting a lot of things that you otherwise could have resolved if you just said, I'm going to throw out that print and I'm just going to try another one and see if it fixes the cell.
Right. Oh, very interesting. The hardware world is very interesting. So it's always fun to like have these conversations and learn more about it. Because
Hmm.
I my brain always goes to dashboards, data warehouses, data lakes, X, Y, and Z. But you're talking more about like the actual equipment and how that data is um, quantified and what it means.
Not just yeah, yes, there's that part,
Yeah.
but there's the how useful is it going to be to me, and then how useful is it going to, however useful it's going to be to me right now is not necessarily how useful it will be to me a week from now or a month from now.
That actually that does bring in a lot of questions, a lot of variables, and also like it's still like that giant open-ended question of how do you solve for that?
I don't know. And I
Yeah,
think that's the
me
other
neither.
thing I've learned is the further along I get in engineering, the more often I say I don't know. Because
Yeah.
a big part of engineering, and this is why, so though I'm an engineer, the very first professional experience I got was in publishing uh, in a in the Royal Society of Chemistry's journal for some research I did, turning plastic bottles into um, nanofiber smoke filters. Okay, that process of experimentation, thinking like a scientist, whether it be in data, right? They're data scientists. Basically, the act of admitting you don't know something, setting out a set of conditions to test, to learn about it, and then reflecting back on, okay, now that I've done this, this is what I've learned. That scientist mindset is more critical to me now in engineering where I'm at today than ever before. Because I don't know, there's so many things I'm not going to know. Rather than pretend, better to just, you know what, let's do an experiment and let's figure it out. Let's get some data behind it.
And I also think just admitting like, hey, I don't know this, but I will take the extra steps in order to better understand it.
Hmm.
I think it just helps and carries people much farther than being like, oh, I know this, I could do this, and like you generally like don't. So props for you being able to like that self-awareness to recognize it's actually a quality in some very most intelligent people. So
Hmm.
or I knew you were smart, but now you're extra smart.
Oh, thanks, Fee.
So let's see. You also have mentioned a couple of times your agriculture business, right?
Yeah, ag tech.
Can you walk me through
Sure.
that?
I will share my passion project. So farming is the way farming used to be is is gone, and that's a problem philosophically for society, and I'll kind of explain why. I will get back to it, but what was the business trying to do? I was trying to implement outdoor hydroponics. I'm sure you're familiar with vertical farming. Okay. Vertical farming is inside, grow lights. You have water that's delivered through various delivery systems, nutrients, etc. I wanted to take aspects of that and do hydroponics outside. Question is, why? Why, Isaac? Why would you want to do that? Okay, there is a lot of land in this country that's getting, the soil's getting completely depleted. There's a whole reason behind it, but there's incentives for why that's going in that direction, but the soil quality is diminishing. I'm in the Midwest. This is something that I'm around, so I think about it. If you have a hydroponic system that you can deploy in a field, you can continue to grow crops above ground think of long, like 8-inch diameter PVC pipes that stretch very long distances, okay, in rows, okay, and then you're going to have holes in those pipes that plants grow out of. The spaces in
Okay.
between those rows, you can have a cover crop growing to help replenish the soil. Okay, so you think of it like a grid. On the PVC pipes with the hydroponics, you have your crop growing, and in between them, you're replenishing the soil. This allows you to grow something productively while you fix the soil, and then after 3 years, you can shift everything over 3 feet and do the same thing with
Mm-hmm.
that next patch of land that was uh, prior being covered by the hydroponic lines. The idea was to use this as a system for replenishing agricultural land while still giving farmers an opportunity to make money. That's the first piece. The second is there's land all over this country that's not good for farming of any type. Think of anything that's covered in cement or asphalt, right? You can't grow there. Well, if I deploy a hydroponic system above ground that doesn't need the soil, now I've just turned something that could grow nothing into a place for agriculture. And why is that important? Well, that gets to the thing that really matters to me, which is we used to have a much more intimate relationship with our food. I used to know the person who provided my food. I used to know what went into it, the cost behind it, and I also got fresher food. There's a
Mm-hmm.
people have people care about their health. One of the things you'll find the trend is shifting away from healthy food being a certain set of macros or certain nutritional facts. People are starting to evaluate food by how far away did it have, how far and long did it have to travel before it got to me, right? A head of lettuce that's picked fresh and eaten within 24 hours is so much more nutrient dense than one that's spent weeks traveling before it gets to you. So, in theory, we could turn farmers into back what they used to be, not manufacturers who make a few generic crops that can't sustain their own family, that they can't eat every day, like corn, soy, wheat. Instead, you can do an outdoor hydroponic system. This wouldn't replace all farming, mind you. The idea was you have a farmhouse. Around it, you have your hydroponic system. This allows the farmer to grow things for themselves, so a wider variety of plants. They usually will get 25 to 30% greater yield because hydroponics is much more efficient. Any plant, by the way, that grows in soil today, at one point genetically was able to grow in water alone because plants migrated from living in water to living on land. Every plant
I,
could be hydroponic in theory. There's a lot of challenges around it, but you now have farmers who can produce a wide variety of crops. They get to be scientists again. That's the other piece of this. In hydroponic fluids, I'm just going to call a slurry. Think of water with your nutrients and whatever microflora are in there. If I get a really high quality slurry, I'll call it, with all the different microflora and bacteria in it that promote the plant growth that I want, I can take a sample of that, I can put it in a tank of distilled water, and I can now I can reproduce that. I can grow it and take that slurry and I can sell that or give it to other systems, and now the great conditions I created for my roots I can now share and multiply everywhere. So there's I loved the idea of farmers growing not monocropping but a variety of crops, allowing the products of each plant play into each other beneficially. I like the idea of farmers having the potential to gather data, temperature, humidity, nutrient levels, TDS, all these temperature of the water, all this data to see what produced a really high quality crop. And then I had envisioned this future where farmers are experimenting, doing all sorts of things all over the country. Yeah, they can keep monocropping, but at least near their home, they're innovating again.
yeah.
Now, launching that kind of a business 1 month before COVID hits was a bit of a tough thing to deal with, let me say, because the last thing a farmer is looking to do during a national, or actually a global crisis is to take on risk like that. So we did a $1.5 million fundraising round. We had 2 weeks to raise the money. We got above a million, but fell short of the 1.5. And at that point, I had to make a decision. Is this worth pushing, or is it something that I set aside and come back to later? And ultimately, in the face of COVID, I thought I have a set of expertise that can help with a current global crisis. Probably best to go after that, do something that I know is going to bring value today. I have many more seasons to come back to this project of mine. So I will eventually return to revolutionizing farming. Farming of the future is what I'm hoping it'll be, but not today. It's not a today thing.
That one sounds like an amazing project. And as you're talking, immediately I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because, by the way, I studied sustainability studies as a minor in
Oh,
college. So
nice,
I'm
nice.
this is like this is kind of right up my
Yeah.
alley. But as you're talking about it, and you're basically talking about like industrial grade hydroponics for farmers. I was actually thinking of a smaller scale for even an individual like
Oh,
apartments or
that's where
like,
we started. So the way
yeah,
this business
okay.
started is we made a grow cabinet. It was basically a think of a China cabinet that was retrofitted to grow plants remotely. So when I was traveling as a management consultant, I wanted to be able to grow things, but I was gone Monday through Friday in different parts of the country. So took a China cabinet and I retrofitted it with a tank of water, some piping, grow lights, some monitors, I had a programmable logic controller where I set my rules for, humidity gets this high, turn on the fan and do XYZ. And then from my phone, I could control the settings and get notifications as to what was happening. So when I was traveling, a lot of the things were automated, but then for certain things, I might get an alert like, hey, you're low on your TDS level. You might want to consider adding additional nutrients. Well, hit a button, dispense the nutrients that get circulated in the system. And it was so cool coming home, and my plants are thriving. I've already been in touch with them through this, and that was where it started was, well, let's do this in apartments. We looked at the market, and then we realized quickly that there are other solutions for this in that in terms of actually making a big impact on the planet, it's more of getting people's feet wet and comfortable with growing in places they couldn't grow before. And I wanted to do big impact right away. So of course I went straight to the farmers. And you know what? I might have had more success if I had done it the way you're describing, which is the smaller scope.
Because I one, this is the farm of the future. And even though I remember when you were talking
Hmm.
earlier about how the way that farmers now farm has completely changed, it's like initially they would farm for themselves. And then as that became like a business, and they started before like currency, they started
Trading.
sharing or like trading,
Yes.
and then they started charging once currencies
Hmm.
were created. So imagine like imagine now one if AI isn't AI being incorporated into your project, how the impact it'll have on individual users. And I know I've talked about like what the future of AI looks, but hearing you talk about your project, in my brain, I'm seeing large buildings where people live, like communities,
Apartments. We
the
can call
rooftop,
them multi-use buildings, right?
multi-use buildings. Everyone lives in multi-use buildings. On the rooftop, there's a green garden. Every apartment either can do like their own, like a community garden on
Hmm.
top of their roof. They can also have like their hydroponic garden in their apartments. Now
Hmm.
they're farming for themselves. Really, this technology has really taken us from what farming was at the beginning of history
Almost
and
full
kind of
circle.
sort of kind of full
Yes.
circle.
And here, talking about that community garden aspect, right? I, as a, right now, there's a lot of food waste. Part of it is because we don't think about where our food comes from. If I only have let's just say 10 slots for growing things in my community garden, well, one, I'm going to be thoughtful about what I grow. Two,
Yeah.
I'm going to plan ahead. I'm going to say, okay, well, it's January. I want to grow these ones. They'll be ready by April. And that means that's good for me because I like eating guacamole in the spring. I don't know. I'm just making something up. But
Yeah.
you'll have less food waste, you'll have more thoughtfulness, and also a greater appreciation. Two people can eat the same food, and depending on, I'll call it the presentation or the vibe or the atmosphere, whatever word you want to use, even though it's the same food, it can taste completely different. I'm sure you've had that where you've either listened to a song, watching a certain sunset, or have had a sip of wine on a certain terrace where the wine is no different than it was before, but it tastes so much sweeter.
For
That's
sure.
that's
No,
that's kind of what I was hoping we could do with food because I love food. I'm Greek, right? Good food is like what I'm obsessed with. I don't eat out most of the time because I'd rather create it here. But yeah, that was the direction I wanted to take it in. I will get back to it at some point. And with AI, actually, you bring up a good point. Had I had the tools I have today, that business, I would have spent twice as much time doing the things that actually mattered for the business because I wouldn't have had to spend so much time on the things I hated copy, emails, the tedious, which word should I use here? The things that trip me up in terms of taking a lot of time. Ugh, I'd rather do an average answer for a random email and and focus my true innovation on the things that actually matter.
No, for sure. And I honestly, I'm super excited for whenever you decide to pick this back up. Like, there's so much potential for it, and I hope you don't lose like that
Oh, I
passion.
won't. Outside,
Yeah.
I have something called the Proving Grounds. Part of my move out to Indiana was to move back to, so the where I'm at right now, this home was built by my great great grandfather in the 1880s. This
Wow.
farm used to be a functioning farm up until the 1950s. Right now, I'm in the process of uh, fixing up some of the basics, right? But the goal is I have this spring, I will be starting, I've started the proving grounds for some outdoor hydroponics. The goal being the years to come, whether or not I'm ready to launch this as a business, I'd love to have a place where I can walk people through and say, hey, come try this. Like walk through this garden. This is something we could take to other people because often if people can eat something or they can touch it, they can feel it, it means so much more than a PowerPoint or a mid-journey image, you know.
Sounds like you need to get that ready for and invite investors over.
Exactly, exactly. In time.
Sure. A fully paid
Rich,
trip out to the Strange Chateau in
yeah,
Indiana.
yeah, exactly.
Fully, I have no idea, but that would actually be like one that's actually really unique. I don't think any investor has been like invited to a private farm to taste privately grown
Yeah, well,
food for a hydroponic garden.
exactly. I wouldn't be, I'm sure there are. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't born a farmer, right? Though I have it in my
Hmm.
family history. I still right now have those outside glasses on that we talked about before we jumped
Yeah.
on this podcast, right? I'm lucky I'm still in the outsider phase because as soon as the Proving Grounds has been going for a while and I'm super involved in it, I'm going to lose that perspective. So right now it's all rose tinted glasses. I'm sure as I get more into the weeds of it, no pun intended, uh, that might change.
So, but I am curious, I know you said you weren't really a farmer, it was in your family. What lessons from space or the pharmaceutical industry have carried over into ad tech for
Yeah.
you?
Well, let me just take a moment to talk about why SpaceX is amazing
Okay.
because that's important. They it was an opportunity to see what best in class looks like in terms of uh,
Mhm.
a company that's developing cutting edge technology, manufacturing it at scale, and successfully deploying it. Um, that they have a huge campus, they have great merch. Believe it or not, that's a very important thing. The brand.
I have one of their jackets.
Good, good. But that helped build a culture and a community, right? We had our own merch store. They had 24 hours baristas in barista bars throughout SpaceX. Um, there's no real there are requirements for safety. Let me start by saying every place has requirements for safety, but they are a lot less holding your hand about it. Now, I'm sure give it a few years, some regulator is going to come back view this podcast and pound their fist on the table saying, "How dare you?" Well, here's what I'll say: we had way less safety incidences at SpaceX specifically because you had to be thoughtful yourself about what you were doing. When everybody is when there's all this tape and you're covered in bubble wrap and oven mitts, it's a lot easier to become complacent around things that are dangerous that someone hasn't warned you about. So there's that aspect. There's the fact that development was not closed off. We had open access to anybody else's files. You could be in a totally different department. When I say anybody, I'm sure HR and finances were closed off, right? But engineering stuff, you could be working on the satellite program or spacesuits. I can go into all your folders and pull anything I want because everything's unlocked and open. And it was great. I didn't have this burden of silos. Um,
Oh,
there was also this acceptance that the mission we are on is something greater than ourselves. It's human colonization, interplanetary colonization. That is the ideal type of vision you want a CEO to set out for you because it's so high in the stars, unintended again, right? But so far out in space um, that it's exciting for anybody. And one thing I'll also say about SpaceX is there's a Gwen Shotwell. If you ever look at the success of SpaceX, Gwen Shotwell is the key reason behind it. Now, Elon always was great with getting hype, getting investors. He loves to get deep into problems. Whether or not he should is a different discussion. um, but Gwen, quiet in the background, not looking for attention, she kept that organization running very smooth. And if there's ever a female leader in today's corporate world to look up to, it is Gwen. So if you ever have a chance, you should chat with her. But what lessons did this bring to ag tech? Well, one thing it brought to me is that whatever gets developed needs to be open source and shared. So one of the foundations of if we deploy these hydroponic systems, the data was going to be you don't get to hide and hoard your data. The idea was we deploy the system, but all that IO data, the temperature, humidity, all that, it's going to be ideally would go on a blockchain where anyone can access it, right? Because the whole point of this was to have people innovating off of each other. It's not a competition, it's to raise our collective ability to farm more effectively. In terms of the pharmaceutical side, what I learned that was helpful for ag tech is they are regulatorily very burdened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's making sure you can take the lessons from how to deal with regulators and implement them for ag tech. But I think the other piece that it's a lesson on what not to do. In pharma, there are a lot of closed doors to develop a technology, to give it to a patient, and then to say, okay, well, we spent $2 billion investing in this treatment. Now we have to sell a certain amount to get our money back and make the profits. So whether or not it's the right fit for you, I almost don't care because I need to sell it. And I know I'm giving pharma a bad name. They did that to themselves. But what I wanted from this is personalization. There's two sides of it. There's the customer side. We are all different. We have different genetics. That's going to impact how we respond to different external stimuli. That piece of personalization is known, but what we don't think about is personalizing the drug itself too. Plants are
Mm-hmm.
all, though genetically very similar, there are differences in plants. Each one is its own unique entity. So the idea was, I'll use cannabis as an example. Um, there are so many different strains that have all these different effects. The idea is you can take the genetics of the individual and match it with specific genetics of a plant. So you would have a subspecies, a cultivar is what we call it, that is grown specifically for certain people with different allele combinations in their genome that they're going to respond best to it. So you don't only account for the personalization of each of your patients, you actually personalize the medicine that's being distributed to them as a result. So that was another piece that we wanted to find a way to build into the process, not for the food side, primarily for the medicinal herbs that might come from hydroponics.
Okay. Wow. Great answers for both. And I know we're up on time.
I've
Or
blown through the time clock so many ways, Fee. So
uh, are you down for some rapid fire
yes, of course.
questions? Okay. What is one piece of tech you think is overhyped?
Phones. I'm not like smartphones.
So I agree with you. I know these are rapid fire, but I'm gonna
Yeah, go ahead.
have
Go
some.
ahead. It's your show. You do it.
I tried to buy like an old BlackBerry because I'm so sick and tired of social media and like phones being an extension of
Hmm.
myself, and I wanted to go back in time when it was just like a tool that I
Hmm.
used and wasn't really necessarily like buying into it. They don't have anymore.
Yeah.
They don't sell them
Or
anymore. It's so
many applications don't work on a computer. They are made specifically for mobile, and that drives me insane because I still like the bigger screen space. So,
ugh. But I agree with you on that one.
smartphones.
Let's see. What's a one tool or framework you swear by in high stakes work?
I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but wow, that's a big question with a lot of consequences. You know what? It's going to go back to management consultant case studies. I don't know if you've ever done those case studies, but treating every problem like a case study and being able to, on a napkin, get to an answer that gets you at least in the right direction within 15 minutes or less. That's a really important thing to be able to do because when there's a problem, the last thing you want in a kinetic situation is inaction. So
Hmm.
it's important to be able to get a solution on paper, get people going, and then you can get to the details later.
That's actually really good. I might start. See, I'm learning some stuff too. Let's see. Most underrated skill in engineering.
People, skills.
Yeah. Yeah. If you weren't in tech at all, what would you be doing?
I would be farming. I would be farming the way I want to farm, probably being unsuccessful with it because without everything I've learned in engineering, I wouldn't have had a way to take the vision and make it into a reality. So I would be what you would call a failed farmer.
Okay. What is the last thing that really surprised you?
The most recent thing that surprised me, hmm, you know what? It's the range of experiences that younger generations are going through today. I thought we had a lot of whiplash as millennials experiencing the pre-technology to post-technology transition. I can't imagine what it would be like to only know the rate of change that exists today. I'm a bit surprised that the newer generations are doing as well as they are and not being as overwhelmed as they are. I mean, maybe they are, and I just don't ask them enough. But
They don't have stability. They haven't
at least
like
they seem to be functioning enough for me to say that they're stable, but I'm sure they're not feeling it.
well, how about this? For the generation that was raised by helicopter parents, they seem pretty
That's true.
good.
That is true.
That that's the one thing that really has surprised me about the next generation. Because when I was doing research on like millennials, intergenerational differences, and parenting styles, we are the most common ones to kind of sort of be like helicopter, nervous, protectors. But these kids seem like they're doing
Yeah.
fantastic. I'm like, okay, you get it. I mean, they are anxious, and I know that they have some like more mental
Hmm.
health issues. But other than that, I'm like, you
But
guys
I
are
was
not,
surprised that despite all of that, how well they're doing. Because it would
yeah,
be life would feel overwhelming if I didn't know what it was like, at least for me growing up, where there was a lot more space, I'll say.
yeah. Wow. Well, Isaac, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining
Thank you for
us.
having me, Fee. It still says recording. You can edit everything, I'm sure, but it's reconnecting to the servers.